So we've got 18 people watching us on Facebook, so I believe that we can already start.
Okay, so let's start. Dear audience, I'm very pleased to introduce to a second lecture of this new tradition of summer lecture series, UMPRUM summer lecture series at Department of the Architecture. Each series is focused on the relevant problems of the profession in the international context. The pilot cycle is concerned with contemporary tendencies in work and research of several architects involved in international academic and professional practice, from new tendencies of computational and environmentally responsible architecture to important competition proposal and dynamic urban concept to realize examples of sustainable structures. A couple of days ago, we already had the first pilot lecture of Kyriaki Gotti from Some People Studio in New York. She was the founder of Some People, and she presented academic projects, winning projects and proposals, and artistic interventions in New York, Los Angeles, and Mexico City. Her studies agenda focus on the democratization of new technologies, robots, digital production, AR, VR, and the role of the public involvement in architecture creation. I'm pleased today we have Slavo Krekovič, 8-4, Next Advanced Music Festival, Slovakia. Slavo is artist, musician, musicologist, and curators, and he will talk today about electronic music, emergent and generative design. So Janko Pernecký will introduce him more closely in a couple of seconds. Next lecture next week will be Anouk Wipprecht from US and Netherlands. She is developer and fashion designer based in LA, San Francisco, and Amsterdam. And she will present the emerging fashion tech division, which includes fashion engineering and interaction design, in collaboration with companies such as Intel, Autodesk, Microsoft, and Audi. Anouk, he's exploring the possibilities and potential of integrating technology into clothing. So, and others, next lectures will be Mirka Bruc from Forma Studio New York, Yale University, then Neil Leach from Harvard and Tonji University, Lenka Petrakova, London, Andrew Keel from Sauerbruch-Hutton, London, and next, the final lecture this summer series will be Gilles Retzing on May 3rd, but his lecture will be confirmed. So thank you everybody for joining us, and Janko, so
thank you. Thank you, Imre, very much for the introduction. And it seems like I don't really have to introduce Slavo that much more anymore. I would just like to say that he's one of two people in this series who are not architects. The other one is Anouk Wipprecht, who is a fashion designer, fashion tech designer. Slavo is a musician and a theorist of music. And I also have to say that he's kind of a legend in the Central Europe when it comes to the advanced contemporary and one might say also experimental music, because he's been producing and organizing, producing music and organizing events focused on advanced music for at least 20 years, if I'm not wrong. And he still remains very contemporary, which is on its own quite impressive. He is organizing the Next Music Festival, which was the 21st year this year, or last year, if I'm not wrong. And that's a place and event where people from around the world are meeting and performing something that could be that is on the verge of music and sound art. And this is relevant for our studio as well, because most of the principles that you can experience with this sort of an art is similar to what we are striving to do in architecture. It's all about emergence. It's all about creating little machines in the music art, it's very often real machines, that physical machines, whereas we architects, we create virtual digital machines mostly, but they work on the same principles, and they create something that could be understood as a body of the art piece. In our case, it's architecture, and in your case, Slavo, it's music, but the principles are more or less the same. And because some of our students are working on projects that are related to music, we thought that it will be quite relevant to also hear about what is contemporary and what is generative and what is emergent in music nowadays. The lecture's name is From Chaos to AI, Emergence and Complexity in Algorithmic Music. And if you replace the music with architecture, it is exactly the same what we do in architecture, in design, in spatial design and creation of space. So without further ado, Slavo, please take the word. We are pleased to have you, and either at the end of the lecture or maybe even during that lecture, we can probably have some questions and answers, but I will let you to organize the interaction with the audience. Also, I have to say that we are live on Facebook, and this is being recorded. So whoever wants to talk, please make sure that you're okay with being broadcast live publicly. Thank you very much, Slavo.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the nice introduction. As was mentioned, I'm not an architect, but I chose an architectural background in my talk. So I will talk about things that happen in music, but are pretty general. So you might already know some of this stuff, and it is possible that you're already familiar with a lot of things I will be talking about. So you can of course ask questions, or we can skip. So actually, the image I've chosen for the title of my presentation is a representation of a nonlinear equation, which is called Kuramoto-Sivashinsky equation, and it's being used to simulate the fire spread, and it looks very nice. So it's a bit related to what I will be talking about. So there are different things we will cover, maybe not in depth, but so that you know what is happening in music and what has been happening over the past maybe 100 years. And I have a lot of material, so I will have to skip something because I think that will be very long. Well, first, we should maybe define what we mean by music. And this is a very, very general term, but usually people think that music is something that is composed of melody, harmony, and rhythm. And, you know, you have these quantized entities that you can work with, and you have the classical theory and scales and chords and instruments, and then you can work with that. Well, that's true to at least partly. It has been true for the last couple of hundreds of years in the Western culture, but I will be also talking about music that is much more than that, and it's basically anything that can be heard, and it can be sound that is, of course, produced by or has been produced by humans and will be produced by machines maybe in the future, but it's also something that works with other parameters, like any kind of synthesis parameters, which then reflect in the sound and sound design, and that's a much wider field. So I was always a little bit disappointed when I heard about generative music, and we'll come to that later. And it was mainly dealing with that smaller section, and so I was always expecting it to cover a much wider range of expression. And so maybe we will just briefly mention that there are some paradigm changes. There have been shifts in the development of music in regard to using electricity. So it was in the 20th century, of course, electronic equipment. Then we have the digital shift, which made it possible to work on a different level. With computers, we had another layer of algorithmic tools that we could have used for music production and program more complex processes. And maybe the last one, and maybe not the last one, is the real-time paradigm, where we could do all these things in real time, and you can have apps in your phones, and you can have tools that are very widely and commercially available. But basically, one of the topics was complexity and how to actually define that and how to deal with it in music. So this is from a general theory of complexity, which has become popular in the recent years, because it allows us to study complex systems in many areas, even architecture. But this is architecture meaning the structure of a complex system. So there are always like some parts or components that interact in non-trivial ways, and we can see that in all areas, including music and art. Maybe we'll skip this division so we can talk about different ways how the system is behaving or how it is composed. In classical music, of course, there have been many ideas about complexity and how to actually deal with a lot of parameters. And in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century, it was basically two approaches that try to evolve this idea of having a complex music that would somehow continue the old Western classical tradition. And one was to control every parameter in the music, but still it was the classical paradigm with instruments, with acoustic instruments, where people would actually have to play what was written in the score. So that was called serial music. And it was an attempt to parameterize everything and to have a very precise values for everything, versus the other approach, which was indeterminism, brought by John Cage and others. It's more like the American tradition, and where people try to open the field for complex situations to happen just by random. And this was the old way with old instruments, but slowly they begin to incorporate electronics. So this is something about the complex system theory in general. So we don't have to say much about that, but almost everything is a complex system, and it can have properties like nonlinearity, emergence, spontaneous order, adaptation, and so on. And so this has become increasingly interesting for music creation as well, including emergence, which was another term from the title of the talk, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Basically, emergence is a situation when the parts interact and create something that is much like a different quality than the sum of the parts, and then it plays a central role in these systems. So what is interesting about this in music, of course, it was because people wanted to compose or create music that would not be with the increasing number of parameters that would not be possible to be created by hand. So all these things that computer technology brought was, of course, very welcome and very used at first in the experimental setting. But even before the practical use, there were these ideas about computation before the first computers were built. So Charles Babbage had this analytical engine as an idea in the 19th century. Maybe we'll come to that later. So why automation in music is interesting. Of course, it's now very, very popular for different reasons, which are mainly financial, of course, because it's something that can be scaled. The music can be mass-produced, can be personalized on an algorithmic basis. You can have royalty-free music that is actually much cheaper than something that a human would compose, and that produces often something that you could call good enough, but actually you can still hear that it's not a very, very interesting piece of music, but it's being used in the advertisement, for instance. And of course, the aesthetic reasons. So that's what's most interesting, at least for me. It's like new possibilities and creative solutions, and the ability to bring new ideas and to actually do something that a human would not be able to do. Then there are other things where you can use algorithms for productivity reasons, like optimization of certain processes and simulation of or using simulation as a tool for developing systems that can also be used in music, or you can actually mimic the other systems that exist in the world. So there are many benefits and issues in algorithm music, but basically it always comes down to the questions like how to benefit the music creator. Also, it's really interesting to have a partner in the creative process where the algorithm can help with different things and on different levels. And also it can maybe very recently, but make contributions that are somehow equivalent to a human music creator, or potentially it can even overcome that and could provide something that could be called meta-human outputs. So this is a very general framework. And there are many historical examples of approaches before actually computers were invented. So we can have even Mozart with the chance, with the dice operations, and John Cage and Marcel Duchamp even had a piece where you would have a score with indeterminate lengths of the notes, and people would sing that together. And actually, this is interesting that even in the 19th century, Ada Lovelace was a woman who helped Charles Babbage with this idea of the analytical engine, which turned out to be an idea for a universal computer. And so she was actually very visionary in that, and she thought about it as a tool that could be used in composing music of any degree of complexity. There are some other ideas that maybe I will go into later. So there's a famous example from the 50s where the Iliad suite was composed by a computer, which looked like this. But actually, this was still music for classical instruments. So that was in the period where people were thinking how to actually have computers help them compose something that would be then performed by human musicians. And we've already talked about automation. This is a quotation by Laurie Spiegel, another musician who used computers to work with generative aspects. And of course, the challenge is to figure out which are the things to be automated in the creative process. As we will see, this is very much something that was actually up to the human and up to the very subjective decision of the human composers and creators of the instruments. But the main idea, which is very, very similar to what we have in design and parametric design and architecture, is something that we need to bring down the musical elements to parameters, like independent variables that can be then algorithmically controlled. And that's where things become interesting, although the ideas were, of course, a bit older than the actual possibilities. So there was even a link with architecture, personalized by Yanis Xenakis, who was a composer but also an architect by background. And so you can see that he had ideas about spatial shapes that could be translated into music, because there's a relation of time and space where you can actually translate the spatial dimension into temporal one. So in his case, it was really interesting to, for the first time, maybe to formulate the theory of formalized music, where you would actually have a control of the elements, but not maybe in the serialistic way, but you would allow certain degree of randomness. And so this would be called by him stochastic music, which is actually probabilistic. So it's based on statistical probabilities that you can work with. Actually, there was a tool named after him, and the question was how to control so many parameters, of course, and this is a very, very important question still. So the researchers named Paris at UMPRUM, which is a research institution, came up with the software that is very much visually like Xenakis' ideas, but also allows real-time interaction. So I will show you a short piece of that. So basically, this is a software where you can design curves or trajectories that can then send parameters to the musical process. So it's not actually. So the thing is, of course, that you can change the shapes in real time, and they influence parameters, and you have many of these. So this is kind of a compositional tool or performance tool, and yeah, you can parameterize everything that relates to musical parameters such as note durations, pitches, and ranges, and you can set some rules for that, like musical scales that can be used in a composition or performance, instrument selection when it comes to traditional instruments, but also electronic and digital instruments. But we have more than that. As I said, this is a much wider field. So we have synthesis parameters, which directly influence the color, the timbre, so-called timbre of the sound. So any kind of technical parameters. So it's really interesting to have that relationship between the compositional or synthesis or technical parameters and maybe perceptual parameters on the other side, because you can have some relationship that's not linear, and you can of course only work with that first level, and then it gets reflected in what you actually hear. So that's also very interesting. How do you relate that? But you can work on different levels in terms of the time scale, which could be a micro scale, where you can work with very, very small grains of sound, which is called granular synthesis. But you can have meso and macro structures, which is a terminology also derived from Xenakis. And so, of course, the most interesting thing is to have all levels combined, where you can then create something that is the whole composition or a whole song, which is still very tricky. So an example from this stochastic music period of Xenakis is an electronic piece where he worked with unstable oscillators that had a nonlinear characteristics, and it caused the pitch to be quite unstable, but still not random. So it was kind of evolving over time. So play a short piece of this. Yeah, so this was, of course, all these ideas were very influential. Laurie Spiegel is another artist that worked with generative principles, but it was within this traditional classical music theory. But she was really interesting in that she created one of the first computer music programs that was able to also compose and perform in real time, automating the harmonies, as you will see.
In a moment, you will be listening to 2 short improvisations I made as a demonstration of Music Mouse. Music Mouse is a computer program written by Laurie Spiegel in 1985 for the Macintosh computer. Music Mouse is an intelligent musical instrument. It does all the calculations needed to keep the music harmonious. The first improvisation uses a classical piano sound. The other is more electronic with an added drum beat.
So this was in the times where there were no artificial intelligence or neural networks involved, but it was still based on rules that you could apply and you can interact with, like in the 90s. Yeah. Maybe a bit later, there was a famous guy, Brian Eno, who also was really involved in design of the softwares that were basically operating in this domain, but it was more focused on the larger structures. So this was from the 96, I guess, and there was a company that developed this Koan audio program, which was also working with the classical musical material like tones and harmonies, and as you probably know, Brian Eno was a big fan of that and composed several pieces which were also kind of open works in the sense that it was not a finished piece, but it was generating material based on rules and on pre-composed fragments that were part of the initial compositional material. And so there was an algorithm that was combining these pieces together endlessly. And also Brian Eno continued to work on these not only compositions, but also tools for creation of generative music. For instance, this is a recent version of an app where he used also the similar principles. Musically, it's a bit more interesting, but it's still the same principle of recombination of the material and some rules that you could set. Yeah, so this is more like an meditative ambient music. So yeah, I'll try to show something that will be a bit different from what we heard now. Oh, sorry. One more step. So composers and musicians were always interested in creating this complexity that somehow between total randomness, which was not desirable because it was basically like not comprehensible to human listeners, and something that would be too regular and too boring and too repetitive. So so there was an interest in systems that were mathematically, that could be mathematically described and used as a simulation of even some natural processes. So so this was the whole field of nonlinear dynamic systems that can be studied, and that have properties like emergence and some interesting possibilities to create an evolution between regular and irregular structures, but not completely random. So nonlinear means that the output does not proportionally reflect the inputs, which also means that they're very sensitive to initial conditions and to the inputs that you provide in terms of the initial variables. And also, it's not that they would be predictable in the long run. And that's also interesting because you always thought about how to create music that's not totally predictable, but still stays within certain ranges. But they have also many other interesting properties that can be mapped to musical parameters. So, for instance, the famous one is the logistic map, where you have an equation that is the recursive one, and actually this is a process that you can observe, or you can actually get results similar to this when you have some biological processes or environments with predators and prey, and you have a simulation where you have like wolves and sheep, for instance, and you can also simulate that, and it brings you to results where you actually over time you can track a behavior called bifurcation. So you can map that to musical parameters, for instance, to pitch. So you have something where you increase the value, one of the variables, and over time you get to situations where the system would oscillate between two values, and then it would double the period. It would oscillate between 4 values, then 8, and then that's still a regular oscillation. And eventually, at a certain value of the variable, it will become chaotic. So it will be not predictable, and that's really interesting for musical applications. For instance, I have a recording of a simulation of such a system. So you can see the R variable, which is important for this behavior. So I've mapped this output of this equation to selection of drums. Basically, it's a MIDI data that are mapped to drums. And you will see as I increase the R variable, the pattern changes, and it goes from a regular beat to something that is less predictable. Yeah, so you could have seen that, of course, it's a bit hard to track what was caused by human input and by the computational process. But there's a value around 3.6 and up where the system becomes unpredictable, and the range of notes it produces and of the sounds is much wider, and it really resembles a human drummer who is also partly predictable and regular, because there are some patterns that are emerging in this process. And as you go up with the R value, then it becomes stabilized again. So it's like a regular drum pattern. So this is one of the application, and you can of course map that to different musical parameters and to pitches and to a lot of other stuff. So there's another equation that is called the Lorentz system, and of course you know that from various applications in music. You can think about mapping also one of the axes to pitch, for instance, and it sounds not so pleasant, but you can see this is another example that is a bit different, because you don't have discrete values and it's just a continuous process.
Sorry for interrupting you. It's like wait. It's like we can hear only some parts of the sound that you are playing, only at the beginning. I don't know if it's with your setting or my setting, but we've heard the very beginning of the sound and nothing afterwards.
I have sent the setting how to do it on the chat, like how to adjust the back, like how to have it on the chat. If you look at it, you can adjust your setting to be able to broadcast that.
Yeah, it's okay. So high, you think it should be high suppression?
Yes, this noise background should be high, like, and then so we can hear.
Okay.
I think it should be set to low, right?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah, it seems like it says like dog barks, and like it looks like it's high, but it doesn't make sense to me either. But
now it's set on medium, so I can just try to.
Okay.
I would say low is better.
Try low first, and then
yeah.
Let's see. I just had a joke ready at the end that on my computer I've got noise cancelling turned on and I cannot hear any of your music, but it's probably on your side.
So let me see.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is something.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, actually the program is right because you have to have noise cancellation. And this is real noise that is somehow, yeah, produced by these non-linear systems. There is another huge topic, which is one of the rule-based areas for music composition, which is very universal because you can use that for of course modeling of any other creative processes. So the famous L systems invented by a guy named Lindenmayer. So it's something that is very inspired by nature, but it's a pattern that you can formalize, and it is a like a string rewriting system, creating self-similar structures like fractal structures and stuff like that. So another example from the musical domain is a small program in a language called SuperCollider, and there is a definition of the rule at the beginning, and then you have a set of instruments that actually play that result. So you have a drum. Or you have several drums that actually play, and the time divisions are actually defined by the rule. So let me play this. Yeah, so this is really interesting because you can always think about how to actually map the result of the behavior to some musical parameters, and rhythm and the rhythmical values is one of the very obvious options, but it really brings you to a very unusual but still kind of irregular rhythms that are evolving over time, and create some really interesting behavior that was used very much by electronic musicians who tried to kind of enhance their rhythmic background. And there's another application of a rule-based system, which is a very famous one also. And this is a whole area of cellular automata, which are basically very defined by very simple rules of cells that can change their state in the next step based on a very simple rules. If they have neighbors, then they change or not change, or don't change their state. And so this was invented by Stephen Wolfram, and it's widely used and studied because these patterns can create very complex behaviors over time. Some of them are very symmetrical, some of them are not. So this is the famous rule 30. There are a lot of them, and as you can see, this begins at the top and goes down based on the above line, and so the iterations go down, and then eventually get some irregularities, but not complete randomness. So in music you have this also known as a game of life, which is another version of this, and you can map that to different parameters and have an evolving piece of music. Okay, so another rule-based idea for composition is to use autonomous agents, and there are a lot of systems which went this way, and it was really popular before the deep learning paradigm kicked in. So basically, you know that from generative design, because you can easily design such agents in languages like processing or others. So these are some logical units that can maintain some state and also can sense the environment and respond. Basically, this is represented usually in a space, in a 2D or 3D space where the agents would move around, and that can be also simulated and mapped to musical parameters. But there are other musical agents that can do other stuff and are not spatially based. But basically, there's a famous algorithm, an invention by Craig Reynolds, so-called Boyd's, where he simulated flocking behavior of birds. So that's a very famous one. But interestingly, you can map that to musical parameters, but of course the most important and most challenging thing is to invent how we would do that. But with increasing amount of computational power, you can have apps in your phones now, which are particle systems used for granular synthesis, for instance, that can have a lot of short grains of sound and behave in a flocking manner, for instance, like this. So yeah, this was an example of a real-time musical instrument design, which uses these agents and their behavior. This is another example, which is also commented by the guy. I forgot his name, but it's a simulation of a system that was programmed in a language called NetLogo, which is usually used for scientific simulations of dynamic systems and complex systems. And it's really interesting to see how you can work with these rules and how that can be mapped to musical processes.
Hi. Well, I know this is a little unorthodox, I guess, but my idea here is experiments in agent-based sound. So what I have here is an agent-based model. This is an agent. He's seeking this well. I've encoded this whole thing, so this is my program. I'll just go. So let's deconstruct this a little bit. So this agent here, the pitch is a function of how close he is to his target. And So 10's not doing terribly. We can do some more interesting things. Like,
yeah, so basically you can then have some other criteria for the selection of notes, and so that it really conforms to some more classical scales, like musical scales, and then the result gets more musical, so to say. But it's really interesting because it's up to your decision how you actually work with these systems, and you can get much more interesting results as well. There's another example, maybe the last one, of algorithms that are kind of nature inspired, and then this is also a very fashionable thing where people work with genetic algorithms or evolutionary algorithms, taking properties or parameters of certain states, where you would have parents, and there would be some crossbreeding and mutations, which technically means that you would take parameters from both and mix them together and create an offspring. And so this guy Samim used this process for generating new clips for the Ableton Live software, where you would have melodies and rhythms and synthesis parameters, and he could then crossbreed and create new versions and through this generative process. So this is an interesting example because it's called musical novelty search, and so he uses these algorithms to produce something that would be never doable by human hand. And it's really interesting that he combines these classical parameters such as the note, pitch, and rhythmic values, and things that you can actually symbolically represent in the traditional musical sense, but also synthesis parameters, of which there are many, and they can really modify the sound. So that was the last part. And there is another very popular algorithm that is also rule-based and was used by many computer scientists to actually simulate language or texts that were composed of elements such as words, for instance, in this case. But it can be also applied to music, where you actually realize that the combination of elements and their succession in time is can be defined by states, where each state has a possibility or a probability of going to the next one. So you define like 30% or 33% of going from one to the next. You can build networks that actually then behave what we would call intelligently, maybe. So, for instance, this was used in Francois Pachet's project, which is called the Continuator, and this is again in the real-time domain, where you could play a short piece of music, a fragment, and then the computer would respond, and the response is based on the Markov algorithm. Yeah, so then we come to the latest development, which is also very popular now, and it's the artificial neural networks that, after this AI winter, which was a couple of decades since the 60s, then with the rise of the computational power in general, they began to play a more important role. So I'm sure you know that, and especially the deep learning algorithms that became popular in the last couple of years. So interestingly, it can be applied to many musical areas, and it's maybe quite interesting to distinguish between them, because the neural networks can be trained on different kinds of data, of course, and they can generate different kinds of outputs. So it is very much depending on the computational power and on the possibilities that you get with that. So the first area is symbolic representation of music, which for classical music is totally fine, because that was mostly where you would have scores with notes and discrete units. So that can be translated to MIDI data, which is basically a code for or a protocol for musical instruments, and you would feed that to the network of different kinds, and then that they would predict, they would produce an output that could be also played by digital instruments. And still, this is very much used because of maybe of much easier way how to process these kind of data compared to audio, because in audio you have many thousands of samples per second, and so that is much trickier to compute. But nowadays we also have neural networks that generate audio, and we will come to that later. You can also use other types of networks that work in time, and they can process gestures, and they can also generate gestures, so you can kind of interact with them, and the gestures would then be translated into musical results. So there are many areas where you can use ANNs in music, either for analysis and for music recommendation systems, such as used in Spotify and etc., but also for generating and morphing audio, for improvisation, for more technical stuff like music production and mastering. I will show you a couple of examples which are interesting because they try to simplify the compositional process and somehow enable users to play with the models and to generate interesting things. Probably, maybe or maybe not, you're familiar with networks called variational autoencoders, which basically work as a series of layers of neurons, of artificial neurons, which compress the information from the original training set, and they create a smaller representation. So there is a series of networks that compress that and create something like a low dimensional representation of the original data in the middle of the process. That is called latent space. And in that latent space, if you don't do anything, then you can decode that into the original, more or less the original information. So for instance, you would have a piece of music like a score, then you would encode that, you would have the latent code in the middle, and then you would decode that into the original one. But you can also do, and that's the most interesting thing, apart from using it as a compression algorithm, you can actually do changes in the latent code in the middle, in the green one, and then it would produce different results on the output, but they would still be somehow within certain range. They would be similar to the original, but still different, and that is what we would call musical variations. Of course, you can use them in a visual processing as well, but this is where it can apply to music. For instance, you have patterns of drums, again, that kind of get compressed. So this is an example of a pattern that is very simple. Then it gets decoded again. And there are already examples that you can find on the web. For instance, this one, which is no longer working, I think, but basically you have a drum pattern that's the input, and then you have a latent vector, which is the latent space with points you can drag, and then you will change the resulting pattern so that it's a variation of the original one. And this brings us to this idea that the AI actually makes it easy for people to make music and to have some complexity in that, which has many implications, of course, including ones that relate to the profession of a musician in the future. But let us see some of how this works. Yeah, so in contrast to the dynamical systems, for instance, this is still, you can't get a totally random output, or I mean random that would somehow be beyond a certain range. And that's why it's very interesting, because it keeps the result musical in a way, but still unpredictable, and you can create results that are basically, that have been only possible by humans before, to create variations of the original material. And there is another example where you can have a lot of possibilities, and then it gets reduced to this or compressed to something that's technically in the middle, and you can play with it so that it gets decoded back to the original, or maybe to new music that would be somehow based on the original data set. In this case, it was many recordings of piano players saved as data, as MIDI data, and the network, which is also a variational autoencoder of sort, was trained on that data and then compressed to this latent space, and that you can control with 8 buttons. Basically, you press the buttons and it decodes that into some sort of longer musical phrase, so it can make you be a piano genius, basically, as you will see. So yeah, this is a nice example how you can actually reduce the complexity of the piano playing and get that down to something that a child can do. Of course, this is this is just an experiment which would probably not be used for really composing music, but it's available. I think it's based on some of the Google algorithms, and there is a website. There's a project of Google Labs called Magenta where you can have more, find more examples of this. And this is another thing that is maybe another level of thinking about musical composition, where you can have the machine compose whole songs. In this case, the system is already for rent. You can subscribe, and it will generate pieces of music that you can select different parameters, but not so many. It's like you select genre, you can have jazz or pop or similar, and the results are something that I would call good enough, maybe for a commercial, or for if you need a piece of music that is not very good, but it's still listenable. So the system is called IVA. Yeah, so there are many post-rock bands that are as good as this. So I would say in terms of replicating or copying a mediocre human players and composers, the AI is already there, and will get better, of course. And so the question is then, who will actually be the author of the music, and what can we use the AI for? There are examples, two of them, I guess, which are based on the audio generation capabilities of the networks. And this is one of them. You might know it's a network that generates endless death metal based on their previous audio data. So you can find it online, and it works all the time, if it works. And so this is a really interesting area, because you can, of course, train the networks on many different audio data, and it will generate basically anything, including human speech. So you get the idea. Yeah. Yeah, there's this interesting phenomenon that is called the uncanny valley, where you would actually approach human-like activity or appearance or output, and there would be a strange moment when it comes to close enough. So you know this phenomenon where it will be really strange, because it's almost like a human output. For instance, in this case of music, we can have several examples of neural networks generating audio, and it's really creepy. So based on what data you feed in, you can get results that resemble something, but it's like when it becomes quite interesting from the artistic point of view. So there's a project by Samuel Sabo, who is a Slovak artist and musician and writer, and it's called Umelá neinteligencia, which is artificial non-intelligence, I would say. And it's a long-term project where he uses neural networks for generation of different kinds of outputs, including texts based on a Facebook chats of Slovak politicians, but also music. And this is his latest project that was a neural network, which was not his invention, but there's a model you can download and train it on the data you want. So he trained the models on data from various Slovak pop songs, and this network then tries to predict or to develop a continuation of that song. So I hope this will work. So there are many different examples, like this one. It's a popular singer. So at the beginning you will hear the original part of the original song, and then it gets blurred, and it continues as the AI generated continuation. So as you could hear, this is very weird and not really resembling the original anymore, but it's also a very creative field for any kind of strange things. Yeah, there are these like projects which work with gestures. Maybe I will play you one piece done by me. Was based on an gestural interaction with a neural network that was trained on my gestures on a tablet, and then it can respond. So when you make a gesture, it responds back with its own, and the gesture was, so it was a 2D movement that was used to control many parameters of a musical process where I had some behaviors, so-called behaviors, stored in different locations. So it would be something like a topographic synthesis, and as you would move around, it would change many parameters. So you would kind of morph or interpolate between them, and so the result was quite interesting. So part of the audio was generated. Was generated by my gestures, and and part of it was the network. Yeah, so this is just a fragment, sorry for the bad quality. And the visual part was generated by the movement of either of the network or of my finger on the screen. So the colors were interpolated as well. And we are slowly getting to the last part. So there's maybe a future which is also based on post-human ideas of music making. So this is an example that we already have now, and it's a robot that is able to listen to what we do, and it's called machine listening, and then it kind of tries to repeat the phrases or improvise, and it's really funny that it's in frame of a certain jazz style, which is for some reason very popular in this improvisational field, and there's also a commentary of the TV
Jazz
guy.
Robots, which combines two of the biggest threats to our nation, jazz and robots. He's been programmed to dig it too, bobbing his head to the beat and checking in with his fellow players, meaning that long after the robot uprising kills all humans on Earth, there will still be someone on the planet pretending to enjoy jazz.
And this is the actual shot from real action, maybe.
There is only one place where great students and advanced technology strike just the right note.
Yeah, so you can actually book it for a concert, I guess. Yeah, so I think I will stop here. Maybe one more thing. It's like completely new area where generative audio is being used. It's the domain of computer games, of course, where it's increasingly being used for generation of new music based on the interaction of the users. But there are also projects which are kind of in between musical composition and a computer game, and I really like this one by David Kanaga, where you, for instance, have passages. It's like a dog opera or of sort. So the main character is a dog, and you have situations where you would create music by moving around, and then in this case it's a score where the dog just moves around and then it plays the notes which are below him or it. So there are really interesting examples of a musical instrument that is also a game, and then these areas get somehow mixed together, which also opens up possibilities of new genre or new ways of music making or algorithmic design, where we already have apps, for instance, that are kind of generating music for complex spaces defined by different parameters like your location or other data that it can get from the sensors. So it can be personalized and ever-changing, and it may be a future of at least part of the music where you don't need real human musicians. But that's a whole another topic, which is of course very well interesting for startups and new companies. So yes, that's basically it for today, and I would be happy to discuss this if you have any questions. Thank you.
I would like to ask somebody else to put the first question, because I took a couple of notes and I've got a lot, but I will just leave it for later. So it's open now. Who would like to start the discussion?
Maybe I can ask something small, if it's okay.
Go ahead.
So where do you see the future of this, like all of this, like generated music and all of this together in the future? How do you see it? Where do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's already here. I mean, the future, at least in part. So we have apps. As I said, we have royalty-free music that you can download and use in your commercials, and it's very annoying for me, at least, because of course this is a very, very mediocre music that is at least in part capable of replacing the human products. So of course there is a big question how this will evolve, because there will be still need for maybe more creative outputs that just AI cannot generate, because human creativity is not completely replaceable. But also I think that we will see more and more of automation everywhere. So it will be that you can automatically generate film scores. You can do improvise with computers. You can, but I think we should also consider music as not only data or something that we can listen to, but also as a social activity and something that is made by humans and for humans, because that has also many other functions than just aesthetic one, maybe. So for me, the most interesting area is this real-time interaction with algorithms, where you can have both, I mean, the machine and the human involved in the musical process. And it's kind of similar to interacting with humans, where you would create something together, but this is of course different, and I think it's still a huge area to be explored. And then the other one is to have completely new, as I said, new genres or new types of music, or maybe audiovisual art that is immersive and that is something in between computer games and musical instruments and just music making. And this convergence is actually already visible, because you can now have virtual reality spaces where you would have synthesizers that you can play, for instance, and that's totally weird, but you can do that now. And so the virtualization of everything is a total trend, especially with the pandemic. Many of the things have moved to online spaces. So yeah, and that's one of the big drawbacks also, that you will spend more time online. But I think yeah, it's a matter of choice still.
Thanks a lot for the answer.
Okay, other questions?
Maybe also like about improvisation, like where do you see improvisation in emergence? Like it could be a band improvisation to like a huge orchestra improvisation or jazz improvisation.
Yeah, so one thing where the neural networks are really excellent is at imitating old styles. So you can feed it data from the classical composition or from jazz music, and you have already the data because you have a lot of like millions of songs and compositions that are already stored online. So you can have huge data sets, and the computers can get very good at imitating that. And also paired with the machine listening part, it means that you can create bots that are able to play with you, and you just choose the style and you go. It's more interesting for me when it gets to creating something totally new and something that you would call non-idiomatic improvisation, where it's not just jazz, but it's basically an open field for sound creation. Well, it's been used already, so it's a really interesting field where you can get complex and surprising results, and there are always some things that would emerge from the process that you would not estimate, or you would not be able to compose upfront. So that's I mean, that's also the case with human improvisation, of course. But this is really interesting, and I try to design systems where I would do some gestures and the machine would respond in a certain way, and that is a feedback loop where I would then respond to what it does, and I have certain options. I can keep that state, or I can evolve some parameters, and it's still based on this evaluation by a human, so it's like a supervised thing. But of course, it's also possible that it's unsupervised, so that the networks would just produce endless results, as we have seen with the death metal thing. So you can feed it any type of music, or even different types of music, and let's see what happens. So I think it's not a problem of having the option to produce it, but rather if it has any value, and who would be able to listen and enjoy it. So the question is, of course, like that in the video about the robots. So maybe even if humans are extinct, we will still have machines that would produce music, and that of course feels completely strange.
Thanks a lot.
Welcome.
All right, I would like to ask somebody to ask another question. Otherwise, I'm going to ask, which is
maybe I would ask one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in what respect do you think these are very similar processes to what you use in generative parametric design and architecture? Because I think most of the things are very, very common and universal.
We discussed more or less all the algorithms that you were showing. Probably not the L systems, because the L systems for me are kind of too rigid to generate something completely new. But we discussed the voids. We discussed the strange attractors, the Halvorsen attractor. We discussed also the game of life. And all of these things, we always use these things. But when you ask the question, I was thinking of when you were showing the way that you can play a game of life. For me, when we are transposing these algorithms to architecture or any sort of form making, the problem is to find some meaning and relation between the algorithm and the thing that we are creating, so that it's not just a visualization of the algorithm. Yeah. And with the music, that you've got different layers of the reasons why you are playing music. Maybe it could be just pleasant for somebody, or it could be explorative, so you can try to discover the things behind. But mostly in architecture, we are struggling with finding a reason why to transcribe the the algorithm into something that is formal, and how to do it so that it makes any sense. And now I'm not talking about making useful architecture. I'm talking about making semantically rich forms.
Right.
So what is the take in music? How do you, the algorithms, the formulas very often, they already exist, and you can play them if you use them as a notation for the music. But is there a movement or some sort of a need to bring it closer to what actually music is?
Yeah, I mean, the question of what music is very, very subjective, of course, because as I said, most of the people think music is just, you know, notes and harmonies and scales and rhythms, and you can easily imitate that, or you can expand that with algorithms such as neural networks, or as I said, as I showed, with any kind of parametric, you know, mappings. And the thing is that many of these examples were just showing, demonstrating a certain capabilities, but of course it's much harder to integrate them into a workflow where you would create something that is really, you know, a complete piece of music, for instance, because you probably would not go on stage and just play a Lawrence attractor for half an hour. So that's a big problem as well. I had a classmate in The Hague at the conservatory who would produce an installation which was actually a performance as well, and it was based on a double pendulum, which is one of the simplest dynamic nonlinear systems. So he would have a pendulum that would, you know, make these movements, and he would place some sensors on each of the wings. And it would then react to that and produce some music. So that was quite kind of spectacular, but it's also like demonstrative in a way that it shows one system and its properties. So I think there are already instruments that integrate some of these features into something that's really playable. So you have apps for commercially available for iPhones and for smartphones and for computers where you would have particle systems, for instance, generate these clouds, as I shown, for instance. And these are really interesting from a compositional point of view, because you can have that integrated as a module, as a plugin for a software in which you compose or perform music. So this has become increasingly available for people. So it's kind of moving away from the research labs in maybe 25 years ago, and people can actually use them in composition. And also the Google Magenta project, they have algorithms that are trained models that you can use in a form of a plugin as well, and then they would, for instance, generate drum rhythms for your track. So based on the preferences, you check something and you can do endless variations. And this is already very much used in the musical production. And also there is this huge area of complete composition software or remix software where you would have things that are actually very much used already. And maybe in many of the commercials you can hear that, because it's nowadays quite easy to actually create a music that is based on a combination of thousands of different commercial music for commercials or soundtracks or anything. So you get something that is kind of not so bad, but you get paid very well. So I mean, if you are able to scale this production, so this is a commercial application. But of course, in experimental music, you have to think about how to work with this as well.
This reminds me to what I was once told by Sanford Quinter, and he keeps saying that. And when I've heard it for the first time, I was kind of disappointed. Sanford Quinter is a theorist of architecture, and he says that the age of digital is over, the digital project is over. And what he means by that is that not that long ago, it was enough to just do something digitally, and that was the art piece. And it's not enough anymore, because it's the fascination is over, and it's an ordinary thing. It doesn't matter how advanced you are, if it's a very advanced AI or a very simple algorithm, the fascination is over. It doesn't mean that we are not going to use those things. We are certainly going to use those things, but the reason why you do your own thing needs to go beyond the fact that you used a digital method. And that's probably what you were saying, that now it became quite ordinary. These are plugins, these are ready-made tools, and you need to do something about it. And that brings me to another question. And this also is an open question in architecture. When you look at a musical piece that is generatively made, how do you evaluate? And I don't mean whether it's good or bad, but whether there is some quality that is worth thinking about.
I think it really depends on the type of music, because you can have these generative music apps like Brian Eno was designing, or like conceptually designing, where it's a totally different genre. It's a music that is endless, and that's just an open field of possibilities, but not so many possibilities. So it produces similar result, and you can have that as a background in your home, and that's not a concert type of music, for instance. Or you can have these music for commercials that are basically not good as music that you would listen to, but it's always nice to have some repetitive piano, and then you have that you can produce tons of.
But that's the equivalent of very pragmatic architecture, and that we are also not very interested in. So
yeah, so if you are thinking about more creative applications, I would say that it always comes down to this novelty search and novel solutions that are somehow still valued in the field, but also it's not just technically new things that are interesting, but it always comes down to a combination of a subjective supervision or evaluation of the generative process. So you would say, at least in my case, I would not be interested in, well, it depends. You can have a process that is algorithmically defined and it just generates a piece of music. Sometimes I do that and I listen to it and I think like, oh wow, like 30 seconds are just good. It's interesting, because you can use that, and you can use that even afterwards. You don't have to do it real time. You can just generate material, and that's the old way, maybe. But it's like you can work with that later. And sometimes I also think about how to make it more interesting, more structured, and how to have all these layers of decisions that are able to to change a process from being kind of similar to something totally different, because to induce some change is still a decision that you would maybe leave up to a human in the process. Depends, because I get bored very easily. So when I listen to a piece of music, so after 10 seconds I would say, yeah, that was interesting, and let's have another one. So you can randomize parameters, or you can do whatever, you can perform with it live, and that's very subjective, I would say.
We've got last 4 minutes, and then we will finish this broadcast and lecture. Would anyone like to comment or ask any question before we wrap it up?
Maybe just very little comment that is very interesting to follow your lecture, Slavo, about composing and using the sound and your profession, which has so many common points with our architecture work. So sound work and build work has very many things common in a sense of geometry and data and processing. So following your lecture is like following any other architecture lecture. So language is very, very common. Is so fascinating to see that totally different visualization. Sound has the same visualization as an architecture through the geometry, but build work and sound work seems like totally different environments, but finally, thanks to nowadays technologies, they have very many common things and platforms. So I enjoyed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to observe because you can also have audiovisual projects, installations and performances where you have the same process and it has also a visual and musical result at the same time, for instance. So this is very common that you have, you know, these immersive experiences. And I believe you can have that in the virtual architecture as well, or there are other fields where it kind of converges together, different media.
I think for a close future will be very interesting to see your comments about what we do, to see our projects, and to have your expertise in almost same work, but a little bit different work. But would be interesting to, if you are able to join us for next review or something.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
I would be curious. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That's an awesome idea. We can plan that ahead. So at this point, I would really like to thank you. I'm very happy that you took time to talk to us, and I hope it was at least a little bit interesting for you as well. And we would be very happy to have you at some of our next events.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much.
And also, I would like to say that the next lecture we are going to have is on Monday, 4 p.m. Central European Summertime. And the guest will be Anna Viprecht, who is a fashion tech designer, and she does a lot of exciting stuff. So Slavo, also, you're very welcome. We are planning to make these lectures as much as possible a community and networking thing. So if you are able to join us for that lecture and the Q&A session, it would be awesome. At that time, we can also call Kiki from some people who is also in the US, and she couldn't join us because of the time difference today, but it would be awesome to collect all the speakers more and more, and probably have a debate at the end between the lecturers that we are having.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
Ciao. Bye-bye.